Hello, welcome to a corner of my garden in West Wales. I'm going to read a few poems to begin with from a book I published in 2015, Towards Humanity. I'll start with a poem about a gardener, and I once read this poem to a group of people, one of whom later said that this was my Lady Chatterley poem. The day throbbed in the sun's furnace. The day throbbed in the sun's furnace when she wandered outside, and in the glare stood the gardener, bent over at the tap, legs apart, bare to the waist, the tanned torso glistening with stickiness of sweat. Even at 20 paces she could see, couldn't she? The dust of his work trapped in the skin's creases, feel the sun's absorbed heat pulsing red from his back, his shoulders. She looked over to where her husband was mowing the grass, a distant figure in the haze of heat, and then again to her gardener. "Shall I come and hose you down?" she teased. He straightened a moment and threw his head back to laugh. She glanced again towards the mower, measuring distances, calculating connections. "It's sticky, innit?" the gardener called. Then he bent again, sluicing cool water over his head, under his tanned arms, slapping it to his belly. Her eyes trickled down with the water. She lingered a moment longer, then returned inside to cool herself off in the shade of her husband. The second poem I'd like to read was heavily influenced by Dylan Thomas's poem in October. And that is the one that begins, "It was my 30th year to heaven, woke to my hearing from harbour and neighbour wood, and the mussel pooled and the heron priested shore. The morning beckon with water praying, and call of seagull and rook, and the knock of sailing boats on the net-webbed wall, myself to set foot that second in the still, sleeping town, and set forth." So my poem is written in the voice of a homeless man in London. It's called Poem in June, after Dylan Thomas's poem in October. I should explain that there's an expression, going to heaven in a wheelbarrow, which is an Old English version of going to hell in a handcart. The wheelbarrow has no connection with gardening in this poem. It was my 48th year to heaven in a wheelbarrow, woken from bin bag and cardboard mat under Waterloo Bridge by some loud-mouthed yobs with piss on their lips and shite in their gobs, and no mind for the edge of dawn arriving on the tips of its toes beyond the drowsy river. I presented myself with the mud of its slapdash shores, its rose-pink tinted ripples rinsing the sleep from my eyes, while the cool mist of its breath kissed the dirt of age from my face. And all of the punctured skies blessed the golden glass and silver steel of the tormented towers where the Thames twisted its tickling tail. And there could I barely remember my birthday, as all the rivers of England and Wales told their tales of the teeming rains, of their springing spun from the high moors to the hurried, headlong and homeless cities, where the harrying taxis klaxoned with where the harrying streets klaxoned with white vans and taxis, and smooth black limousines cruised through the beautiful bloodless veins, offering rides to the dysfunctional, discarded, misused and abused fools, furious to find their blind alleys frozen with fire. Yet the unhearing cities listened to the distant bleak moor's pitiful song, carried along on a cormorant's wing, as I set foot, hungry as a drain pipe, into the excited jazz-cool morning, making its merry and miserable way full tilt into the footloose day. And there could I dribble my birthday away, where a banker bought me a steaming tea and a bacon butty out of charity in the all-night cafe. The afternoon bloomed in a binge of boredom and a bottle of cider in the embankment garden. Oh, once upon a cardboard time I was a poet, but now the rhymes elude or make me cringe, and I'm screwed to this life by all those years of booze and skunk that served me as a wife. Soon, under that pregnant moon, I'll take a trip around the skips behind the shops to find food, to the tune of pneumatic drills and shrill sirens and the green, tranquil fumes. It was my 48th year to heaven in a wheelbarrow, as, heading to bed under a bridge of steel and shadow, I let the rivered city loose to drum through my blood for once upon another, maybe, year. This next poem was written in response to a call for people to write the letter that is held by the statue of a soldier on platform 1 of Paddington Station in London. This was in 2014, which was the centenary of the outbreak of the First World War. So there were over 21,000 of these letters. It didn't have to be a poem, it could be any form of work at all in the form of writing. They were archived in the British Library. So this was a version I sent in. Letter to an unknown soldier. Dear Tommy, how are the blasted fields of France? Not much like the corduroy fields at home, I guess, where you were following the plough and caught the sunlight's glow off the moist, neat ridges of loam, furrowing far into an unknown future, while the blackbird sang his love song from the chirruping copse. Nor like the sun-drenched hayfields, bleaching in those days of tranquil yellow, as you followed the clicking, ticking tedder to turn and turn and turn again the sweetly scented summer crop. Now you and your fellow labouring men will never know such pastoral peace again. Your country needs you, you were told, to go a-mowing in the killing fields of Flanders and of France, to dig the soil and sow the fields with shells, to make the earth to boil with mud and blood of foreign working men, to tunnel like a mole, as blind as fools, to try and blow the Hun to kingdom come. And from the factories and the fields of Germany there'll be some young, hard-working Fritz with a mother, sister, brother, sweetheart, lover, and you may fire the shots that shred their lives and his to bits, before a Werner, Helmut, Klaus or Willy does the very same to you. But no matter, you will be crucified on the cross of a good cause, for this, it's said, is the war to end all wars. Tommy, I know I shouldn't tell you this, but one day soon you will be face down in the stinking mud, soaking in your sweat and blood and piss. And years hence, people will solemnly say that they remember you and value your spilt blood, and that you served your king and country well. The great and good will sing your praises, then redraw some lines on maps, and maybe plant a stone near where you fell. Tommy, do you know that you are fighting this war because a Serbian nationalist rebel shot dead an Austrian royal in Sarajevo? Do you know where Sarajevo is? It doesn't matter, since some other murderous incident would equally have done to haul you from the fields and arm you with a bayonet and gun. Do you wear the scarf your mother knit, a mother's love in every stitch? Somehow she knows you'll never return to sup with her at kitchen table at close of day with candles lit, when you have rubbed the horses down, having led them back from field to stable, or trimmed a hedge or cleared a ditch. Go now, Tommy, for there is a floundering horse out there, belly deep in sucking mud, that needs your horseman's skill and love. And a German ploughboy, fresh from foreign furrows, has his rifle ready, and will have you soon in his assassin's sights. He does not know that you and he could talk all night, could bend each other's ear about who ploughs the straightest furrow, and the taste and price of beer. I'm writing you this letter, Tommy, from near 100 years ahead. The wars, they keep on coming, Tommy. for the machine of man's stupidity continues to be fed. The groaning you can hear, Tommy, will never go away. So best foot forward now, my lad, into those fields of bloody clay. Yours in sorrow, Dave Urwin. And finally, from this book, I'd like to read a poem called Death on the A40. And this incident, if you can call it such, actually occurred. And these are my thoughts on this particular death. Death on the A40. It was the swarm of flies I saw first, the gagging, loose black knot, dancing its celebration in the thick sun heat beside the lay-by. Some had settled on her vulva and anus, crawling around her soft exits and entrances to lay their eggs. And soon a writhing wriggle of maggots would be eating her insides out. For every farmer or gamekeeper who may say the only good fox is a dead fox, who may put his foot down as she crosses the road, let there be another to see in her the rufous, blooming beauty, the sleek dignity. Let it be that someone moved her corpse from the carriageway to prevent the trucks mangling her bones, tire-treading her soft, clean fox fur, if she herself had not limped broken just under the mercy of the trees, where now she lies, her 2 rows of swollen teats betraying the cruelty of the impact. And I thought of her cubs down some hole, sensing the approaching desolation of motherlessness, settle silent and slow, and accumulate softly like the snow swirling down on a winter's night. I'm now just going to read a couple of poems that have not been published, apart from possibly on my own personal poetry blog, jadedmountain.wordpress.com. I've written quite a few poems about the so-called refugee crisis, and I think this one is, for me, is one of the best, which gets to the essence of the issue. Refugee. Though we conquered your continent, though we stripped you and shackled you and put a shovel in your hand, though we told you to be grateful for Bible and shovel, though we told you to dig for diamonds and gold, for copper and cocoa, for coffee and tea, whilst we built our palaces out of sight, though we subjugated other continents and peopled them with our own refugees from poverty or persecution, from struggle or starvation, and though we gave the natives glass beads for their jewels, though you now gather at the gates of our palaces, built from your dust and your sweat, we have no need for more of your kind, though you die by the boatload in the seas around our fortresses, full of hopes and dreams, though you die under the wheels of our speeding commerce, you who are nameless from unpronounceable places, we have no need for more of your kind, so you shall not pass. Though we drive home from the supermarket, hugging our bottles of water, and though our cats and dogs are better fed than you, you shall not pass. You shall not pass. This next poem you might describe as a dystopian vision. Or is it the future in reality? Fake Truth Blues. There's a child on a lead and the dogs are running free. There's a phone shop on the corner where the baker used to be. That immigrant looked shifty, so they hung him from a tree, the one that's left. But no one's listening, nobody's listening, no one can speak. The care homes are abandoned, to save them didn't pay. The old folks have been crucified, they were in somebody's way. And the children chew on concrete when they go out to play, if they do. But no one's listening. Nobody's listening. What can they say? The hospitals have overdosed, they vomit up the sick, that line the bleak white corridors where conscience doesn't stick. Chancellors dine on caviar, they never miss a trick. Did you think they would? No one is listening. Nobody's listening. It isn't music. You cannot learn the facts at all. Who knows what's really news? Everything that you can read is just a story to confuse. And there's a million gods on offer, but you don't know how to choose. But what the hell? No one is listening. Nobody's listening. You're free to lose. The glaciers are melting and the forests are on fire. Someone throws another corpse upon the funeral pyre as they hang another refusenik from a noose of holy wire. Were you wanting mercy? No one is listening. Nobody's listening inside the quagmire. The workers are all starving, but they're in some foreign land. We cannot see their bleeding knees. From here the view is grand. But all across the universe some voices take a stand. Is someone listening? Somebody's listening. Hold out your hand. There's a child on a lead and the dogs are running free. That immigrant looked shifty, so they hung him from a tree. But no one's listening. Nobody's listening. Did I hear you speak? I'm now going to read a few poems from a book that was published in April, and I was due to have a launch on April the 8th, but because of the COVID-19 lockdown, the launch hasn't yet taken place. But I'd like to read you a few poems from this book, and it is available if anybody would like to purchase a copy from me directly. It's called Plain Song from the Backstreets of Silence. The first poem I'm going to read is called The Gift, and it's after a scene in a film by Jim Jarmusch, directed by Jim Jarmusch, and called Paterson. Now, Paterson is quite a significant city in the United States insofar as William Carlos Williams practiced there as a doctor, and there are various other connections with poetry, and the main character, whose name is also Paterson in the film, is a poet and also a bus driver. And I'd highly recommend this. It's one of the best films I've ever seen, and films are quite important in my life. The Gift. I was sitting on a bench, gazing at water, falling, flowing. It was spring. A stranger came by and sat down next to me. He hesitated, started to make conversation about poetry. "Do you like poetry?" he asked. "Yes," I said. We talked a little of poets we like. Then he asked me, "Do you write poetry?" "No," I said. "No, I don't. I'm an engineer." We talked a little more, and then he got up to leave. He drew a book from his bag and handed it to me. I flipped through the pages. They were clean, cream, and blank. "It is a gift," he said. "You might think of something." The next poem is based on a real incident which took place in the Bishop's Palace in Wells in Somerset, and it's essentially about how we make assumptions about people just by their appearance, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody, as this poem demonstrates. In the Bishop's Palace. "Please feel free," the notice said, "to play the piano." He did. the man who looked, I thought, quite unlike a pianist. With a delicate touch and profound feeling, he played Erik Satie's Trois Nocturnes. Eager to impress, I said, "I know that was Erik Satie. Was it Trois Nocturnes?" "The third," he said. He went on to play Chopin and Beethoven with a delicate touch and profound feeling. Later, on the street, as we passed the busking Russian violinist, the piano player passed us, looking like a builder, or a bus driver, or a window cleaner, or so I thought. This next poem is a response to T.S. Eliot's four quartets, specifically East Coker. And the epigraph at the beginning of the poem by T.S. Eliot is a quote from that poem saying, "In my beginning is my end." The poem is called Endings and Beginnings. No beginning, no end. Nothing out of everything, everything out of nothing. Out of the circle, into the circle. Circle within circle, turning and returning. Morning turning to evening, evening to morning. Dusk to dawn, dawn to dusk. Victim to killer, killer to victim. Victor to vanquished. The circle unbroken. Infinity of circles, turning and spinning. Falling and rising. A falling and a rising of water. But above all a falling of leaves, of rusting steel, of shattered cities, of worms, of plastic bags, of bullets, of bicycles. The forever falling into dust. The dust devil rising, it's taking its shape. The once bullet, now flower. The once worms, now fortress. The once desert, now meadow. The sun's engine cranking dust into dust. All new creation are recycling, even the poem. The same words in a new order. The same idea in new words. Illusion of newness out of unseen circles. Wordless worlds, worldless words. No beginning, no end. This next poem is a little bit, well, we might say surreal. I think it's a little bit Spike Milligan-esque, if any of you, well, some of you will know Spike Milligan. It's called Talking Blue Cheese Blues, or a simple Sartrean dialectic on the essential absurdity of human existence. I was growling at the cheese when the cheese said, "Please, why are the hares on your knees so discontent? They have an easy life, they're never threatened with a knife, and they always spend their holidays in Kent." I said, "What do you know of hares, or of problems climbing stairs? You are an unempathic block of chatty cheese. Now, if you speak of mould, or of feeling rather cold, we could settle in the warmth of Monday's breeze. Or if you speak of lobster, or of a Cosa Nostra mobster, the fridge will cook the library in its flames. So meet me in the park, when at noon it's very dark, or we'll never free each other from our chains." I tackle many different subjects, and nothing is. It's impossible. There is nothing about which I will not write. I think I've got that sentence out finally. And one of these subjects is suicide. Now, this poem is a specular poem, or mirror poem, in which the second stanza of the two mirrors the first one, by having the very same lines, but in reverse order. I've written at least one other poem, I think, in this particular form. No particular reason. There was no particular reason that made him slice his wrists open. It was just another routine day. Scent of lilac from suburban gardens, taste of traffic fumes assaulting the lungs, the woeful world in its cage of steel and glass. The children were in school, learning to fail. His wife was in hospital, scrubbing the floors. Another limp trudge to the job centre, all the shop windows screaming money and sex. Every slick promise was on special offer. Under the thundering concrete bridge, the ravenous river ferried him down as the shard of window glass opened a vein. As the shard of window glass opened a vein, the ravenous river ferried him down under the thundering concrete bridge. Every slick promise was on special offer, all the shop windows screaming money and sex. Another limp trudge to the job centre. His wife was in hospital, scrubbing the floors. The children were in school, learning to fail. The woeful world in its cage of steel and glass. Taste of traffic fumes assaulting the lungs. Scent of lilac from suburban gardens. It was just another routine day that made him slice his wrists open. There was no particular reason. I'm now going to move on from that book and read a poem that was written in 2014. Now, 2014 was the centenary of the birth of Dylan Thomas, and it's very difficult to live in southwest Wales and not be very aware of the life and work of Dylan Thomas. And I have actually read this poem a couple of times in Brown's Hotel in Larne, which was Dylan's favourite watering hole. And one member of the audience who heard me read this sometime, an American, called it my Dylan mashup. So there's no logical linear form of time in this poem. I like to say that time is like sticky toffee. Don't assume that time is linear and flows from the past to the future. There are things happening in this poem which you may say, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. For example, Dylan is riding a 1957 Harley Davidson. Well, he died in 1953, so how is that possible? So this is called Dylan's Last Tour. To begin, not at the beginning. It's not a starless, moonless or Bible black night. Dylan's on this poetry tour of the States, riding his 1957 Harley Davidson from town to town, looking cool in his wraparound mirror shades, cruising down Highway 61 for the first time, and thinking how he might well revisit it one day. Dreaming of swallow-thronged lofts and fishing boat bobbing seas, smoking marijuana with his brill-creamed curly locks blowing in the wind, and hoping someone will buy him a beer that tastes more like the stuff from Brown's at home, and that some cool chick will so love his verse she'll invite him to stay the night. How many bloody roads must a poet ride down if he don't want to sleep in the sand? He whinges to himself. I'm walking down that long, lonesome road, babe. Where I'm bound, I can't tell, he sings into the wind. But he's thinking about how young he once was, and how easy it was under those apple boughs back home, and how all those days were lamb white and he didn't care. Lines suddenly flit into his sucking mind. Though I know that evening's empire has returned into sand, vanished from my hand, left me blindly here to stand, but still not sleeping. Bloody hell, I think I've got something there, he gasps. He skids to a halt in a whirlwind of dust, and his notebook is out in a flash, and he writes more. Then take me disappearing through the smoke rings of my mind, down the foggy ruins of time, far past the frozen leaves, the haunted, frightened trees, out to the windy beach, far from the twisted reach of crazy sorrow. He's singing it now into the Arizona desert, which suddenly seems a hell of a long way from Carmarthenshire and its mussel-pooled and its heron-priested shores. "Oh, bugger," he says, "there's no point in going gently into that good night. I might as well catch and sing the sun in flight." He does another poetry reading to an audience of 5 in a deserted gas station on the outskirts of Tucson, and no one buys him a beer. He's starting to feel nostalgic for lilting houses and starry dingles. What's the matter with people out here? Don't they know that back home he was honoured among wagons and prince of the apple towns? He decides to kick the motorcycle nightmare and takes a Greyhound bus back to New York City after cadging the fare from one of the 5 women at the gas station reading. He winds up at a party in Greenwich Village, where Ginsberg is howling about how he's given America everything, but now he is nothing, and how he saw Walt Whitman and Garcia Lorca lurking among the watermelons in some downtown supermarket, and Kerouac is making out with a bottle of wine and chanting Buddhist sutras on the sofa. John Lennon's there too, imagining all kinds of impossible stuff. Dylan goes up to him and wants to know who is the Japanesey chick in the rice paper kimono, with images of Salvador Dali's melting watches stamped all over it, and would she like to hear how the force that threw the green fuse drives the flower, drives his green age, and can she offer him a bed for the night because there ain't no chicks like her back in Newquay, Cardiganshire. Henry Miller's slumped in a big armchair with his nose in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov and a naked woman on each of his widely spread legs. He catches sight of Dylan briefly and says, "Hey, how you doing, Mr. Jones?" "It's Thomas," says Dylan. "How you doing, Thomas Jones?" "No, it's Dylan bloody Thomas," says Dylan. "I'm famous back home, see?" "I'm a poet," he adds, trying out his best Welsh accent. But Henry's got his mind on other things, and not only Dostoevsky. Suddenly some crazy-looking dude who claims to be an artist asks would he like to see a picture of a lot of cans of soup because it's going to be famous and it's a goddamn masterpiece. Dylan says, "In the jingle-jangle morning I'll come following you," and takes out his notebook to write down and yet another inspired line. Lennon walks by, muttering something about reading some news of 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, and then wants to know where Dylan got the idea for Gossamer Bainon and Polygarter. Now Dylan's already had a skinful and more hot dogs and burgers than is good for any man, but he's a true poet, and he just can't stop the new lines coming. He sings, "I'm ready to go anywhere, I'm ready for to fade into my own parade. Cast your dancing spell my way, I promise to go under it." At that very moment he turns around and vomits all down Lou Reed's maroon velvet suit. "Hey man," says Lou, "take a walk on the wild side." More than a little puzzled, Dylan says, "Meaning?" But before he hears the answer, hands are around his throat and dragging him towards the door. "What do you mean telling Yoko there's too many cans of soup in my fucking picture? It's modern fucking art, man." "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Warhol. I was just..." squirgles Dylan. "Get out, you lousy goddamn taffy bastard." "Any chance of another scotch on the way out, Mr. Warhol?" begs Dylan. But after another vile, cacophonous volley of Yankee expletives, he's face down in the alley with his pointed shoes and his bells, not dreaming of swallow-thronged lofts, fishing boat bobbing seas and lamb-white days at all. But Dylan's a true poet, and still new lines won't stop coming. "You used to laugh about everybody that was hanging out. Now you don't talk so loud. Now you don't seem so proud about having to be scrounging for your next meal. How does it feel to be on your own, with no direction home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone?" Bloody hell, he thinks, this may do for Eli Jenkins' prayer, but they're not going to like it back home. He hears someone singing from a room way above his head. You walk into the room with your pencil in your hand. You see somebody naked and you say, "Who is that man?" You try so hard, but you don't understand just what you'll say when you get home, because something is happening here, and you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones? Dylan rolls over. "It's Thomas, not Jones," he tries to shout. He groans. It's been a hell of a day. A hell of a tour. Time passes, he thinks to himself. Time passes. Thank God. Then one more bright idea illuminates his mind. Hell no, they won't like it back in Carmarthenshire. They're stuck in the past there, bound by tradition. They'll probably call me Judas. But bugger it, I think it's time to go electric. Yet, as we all know, Dillon never got to try out his radical new idea on the people of Carmarthenshire. My next poem I'm actually going to recite. It was written in 2016, which was the centenary of the birth of Roald Dahl, who is famous mostly for his children's stories, but who actually also wrote very, very good short stories for adults. He was also well known for making up fantabulous new words in the children's stories, and I've made up a few words in this poem, which is a celebration of Roald Dahl. And the poem is called Down in Noggy Bottom. I wanted to avoid calling it Down in Soggy Bottom, so I sometimes call it Down in Quoggy Bottom. But today it's going to be Down in Noggy Bottom. The Snaggawumps lived all the way down the Dipsy-Tripsy Hill in Noggy Bottom, having hopped away from Tattletown so long ago that just when I've forgotten. Breakfast every evening was cabbage fish, which they caught in the Purple River, by singing their riddles of gibberish, which made all their enemies quiver. For the Snaggawumps had lots of enemies, as all strange creatures do, and they'd eaten up all of the strawberries, which in Noggy Bottom once grew. Their language was lovely and yellow, like the sun of a June afternoon, and they loved to sing songs to the cello, who complained they were never in tune. The Snaggawumps asked lots of questions too, about this and that, and who, when and why, like what to do if your mouth's shut with glue, or your toes in a cherry cheese pie. And why is the greater wart-faced scumbum bird so incredibly shy? And no camels are seen with 3 humps. And why we are born if one day we'll die? And toads are all covered in lumps. So if you should meet any Snaggawumps when you're froswaffling down in the dell, please answer their curious questionumps and make friends with those creatures as well. My final poem is quite a long one. By the way, do you like my shirt? I thought it was very autumnal, and I've got to rival Dominic Williams, haven't I? This poem is bang up to date, except for the COVID-19 virus. That doesn't appear in it at all. I actually wrote this poem, I think, in February before the virus took hold in Britain. Now, the main protagonist in this poem, and I should also say that some people may consider this not to be a poem. I have actually written it in stanzas, and I would say it's a narrative poem, and in free verse. But some people may just say, well, it's just a story. What makes it a poem? And that's a question I often ask. What makes a poem a poem? It needs someone better qualified than I am to answer that question. So the main protagonist in this poem is Jesus, and I should point out that I treat Jesus with the greatest of respect in this poem. So even if you're, if you're a fundamental Christian, you may not find it very funny. And but as I say, Jesus is treated with the greatest of respect. It's called The Second Coming, not after W.B. Yeats. Although never a religious man, one day he suddenly found Jesus, skulking among the coats in his wardrobe. "Jesus, what the flippity flop are you doing in my wardrobe?" he couldn't help himself but ask, quite fairly. "Daddy sent me down to find you," Jesus said. "Christ, you look a little bit like Jesus," said the surprised man. "And who in heaven's name is Daddy?" "I dig your language," said Jesus. "Very cool." "Aren't you going to tell me what you're doing in my wardrobe? And would you mind getting your long greasy hair off my jackets? I need to be clean and tidy for work. Jesus turned the other cheek to flip his hair off the man's jackets, but the wardrobe was small. There's been a coup, a revolt, said Jesus. Sis and I, we'd had enough. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. Sis? Jesus, said the surprised man. You've got a sister? Dad had to keep that hushed up, said Jesus. That's why we moved to the planet Zog. Now we've come to save the Earth from its impending apocalypse. You dig me? Dig? Said the surprised man. No, not really. I need my tweed coat. I've got a bus to catch. Not so fast, said Jesus. Tweed good, plastic bad. You can't take that plastic bottle to work. Jesus pulled something from his robe. Here, take this one. It's made from recycled bamboo. Now, hold on, said Norman, for this was his name. You didn't save the world the last time you tried. Peace be upon you, brother, said Jesus. But you know I was betrayed by someone close to me. This time I trust nobody. Not even that Blue Planet bloke, Attenborough? Asked Nousy Norman. Not even him. He'll hate me when he sees me headlining at Glastonbury. He thinks that's his gig. In the following weeks, Jesus filled football stadia from Barcelona to Manchester and from Tokyo to Los Angeles, pissing off Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. When he skipped across the Atlantic in his robes and sandals, it took very little time at all. Greta Thunberg questioned his commitment. Most of us saints cannot walk on water, she whimpered to a reporter from The Sun. Donald Trump tweeted, "This guy is not the Son of God, and climate change is all fake news." The Queen invited Jesus to Sandringham for a cup of tea and a chat about Brexit. Meanwhile, in Norman's suburban garden, paparazzi sprouted like stinging nettles, their lenses pointed at Norman's bedroom. Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos were in a bidding war for the now iconic wardrobe, despite the Mail on Sunday headline, "Norman's wardrobe not for sale, says hacked-off Norman." Unknown to Norman, Russian agents sat across the street listening to his every word. They'd bugged his house on Putin's strict orders. Also unknown to Norman, but known to the Russian agents, hiding in the hedge of his neighbours were two CIA agents, watching the Russian agents watching Norman. And MI5 had hacked into his email account. They found an email from Norman's Auntie Doris about her upcoming, ingrowing toenail operation, and could he feed the tortoise that day? A covert message. By now, Jesus had gathered a crowd of 5,000 climate change protesters in Hyde Park, London. They are hungry for action. And food. Jesus produced 2 organic wholemeal baguettes and 7 lentil burgers, and 12 of his closest followers distributed this healthy meal. And lo, they were all much satisfied. Then Jesus got on his donkey called Mustafa, and solemnly rode up Whitehall and into Downing Street, and knocked at number 10. British bobbies surrounded him, hands on truncheons. "Stay cool," said Jesus. "Peace be upon you all, brothers." Mustafa said nothing. Prime Minister Johnson stuck out his blonde mop and said, "Piss off, you scabrous hippie, and get that insolent-looking donkey off my patch." "Peace be upon you, brother," said Jesus. Piss off with your peace crap," retorted Boris. "I've seen you stirring up rebellion and revolution with your anti-plastic rhetoric and your recycled bamboo toothbrush. Plastic is good for the British economy, and I'm here to make Britain great again. I'm the top dog here. I could have you arrested right now. So get back to where you came from." Mustafa stamps a hoof. He's heard enough. His big, soft, furry ears twitch with annoyance. For once, Boris shows some common sense and backs off. "You've not heard the last of this." Mustafa says, "Fuck off, you nincompoop," but under his breath, so Jesus cannot hear. He knows Jesus would disapprove of it, in spite of all the provocation. "I'd like to kick that man's ass," Mustafa says, But again, so Jesus doesn't hear. "You're not the only one," says a British bobby, and gives Mustafa a pat on the arse. "Judge not, that ye be not judged," says Jesus, as if he knew what Mustafa had said. "What measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." "Thanks for the sermon," says the donkey, "but I'd still like to kick that man's ass." The next morning, Jesus was in St. Paul's Cathedral to give a sermon on the pursuit of wealth that leads to social breakdown and ecological collapse, having spent the night on the embankment with the homeless and the destitute. Crossing Paternoster Square, he entered the London Stock Exchange and smashed every screen he could reach with his olive staff. "Oh, great," brayed Mustafa. "Do I get to kick some ass in here?" Jesus said, "Love thy neighbour as thyself." "These aren't my neighbours," said the donkey. To the traders on the floor, Jesus said, "What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What of the poor people who mine the copper you trade, pick the tea and coffee, cocoa beans, mine the diamonds? It shall be easier to pass my donkey here through the eye of a needle than for any of you to enter the kingdom of heaven. Peace be upon you, brothers and sisters." Mustafa says, "Jesus, don't give them that eye of a needle shit. They need their asses kicked." Now you remember about Jesus' sister. She's there too. She's called Rebella and is on the donkey's side. "This peace thing is no good," she says. "You don't get anywhere that way." "Mahatma Gandhi," says Jesus. "He got rid of the British from India." "Yes," says Rebella, "but now they are subject to a neoliberal capitalist middle class, just like nearly everybody else." "Well," says Jesus, "violent revolution didn't work in Russia or China, did it?" The donkey listens to this argument, turning his wise head this way and that, with his furry ears twitching attentively. But he's stubborn, and his mind is made up. Back in Norman's famous house in Blackpool, Norman himself is hoarse from countless interviews. "Was Jesus still at home when you came back from work?" "Oh, yes," said Norman. "He was sitting on the sofa, surfing the net on his iPad. We had a nice cup of tea and a custard slice. Then he left, saying he had to see a man about a donkey. Not seen him since then." The Sun has offered Norman £500,000 for the exclusive rights to his story. But Norman says there's nothing much to tell, and the Blackpool Gazette can have it for nought. Now, not only Mustafa's ears were twitching, smartphones were twitching, vibrating and buzzing from Singapore to Washington and from Kamchatka to Patagonia. Everywhere Jesus went, he gathered more disciples, which pissed off Madonna and Lady Gaga, to name just two. When Jesus announced that his underpants were made of ethically sourced and recycled bamboo, the world's supply sold out within 10 minutes. One brave reporter asked Sir David Attenborough what his underpants were made of. Not bamboo, it seemed. Uproar, chaos, hysteria, share prices tumbling. Jesus and Rebella knew their time on earth was limited. They still argued tactics. Jesus wanted to go and see Norman one last time. He emailed Norman, and every secret service intercepted his message. World leaders staged a peace conference in Rio. As Donald Trump, Boris Johnson and Vladimir Putin smiled and shook hands at the Rio Peace Accord, two agents were outside Norman's front door, spraying a substance from a small bottle onto the door handle. CIA, FSB, MI5, Mossad. Who knows? Rebella has disappeared. We don't know where. And Mustafa? Don't you worry about him. He now lives at the Donkey Sanctuary in Manchester, where he works with children with special needs. He is under armed guard and constant surveillance by MI5. Peace be upon him, and peace be upon you.